Picture what it feels like to give someone your loyalty, your patience, your love, your grace, and every last piece of your heart, only to have all of it taken for granted. Instead of protecting what you offered, they damaged it. Instead of cherishing you, they used what you gave and then pushed you aside. What many people do not understand is that when a narcissist deeply wounds the one person who stood by them through everything, something inside them starts to shake. It is not just the loss of a relationship that unsettles them. It is the threat of losing the false version of themselves they have worked so hard to maintain. When the person who gave the most finally breaks away, it forces a reality they do not want to face. And that reality can be far more frightening to them than most people ever realize. One of the deepest fears a narcissist faces after hurting someone who gave them everything is the fear of losing their source of emotional supply for good. To really understand why this hits them so hard, you have to understand how they often experience relationships. For emotionally healthy people, relationships are built on care, empathy, trust, and mutual support. But for a narcissist, a relationship is often valued more for what it provides than for who the other person truly is. They seek attention, reassurance, admiration, emotional reactions, and a sense of control. All of that becomes fuel for their unstable sense of self. The person who kept loving them, defending them, and forgiving them usually became one of the most reliable places they could get that fuel, which is why losing that person feels so threatening. Very often, the one who gave them everything was the person who made excuses for them when others noticed something was off. You were the one who stayed when things became painful, who kept hoping they would change, who kept offering loyalty even after being hurt. Over time, the narcissist becomes comfortable with that pattern. They start to believe you will always be there, no matter how far they push, no matter how much damage they cause. That belief becomes part of how they feel safe. In their mind, your presence is guaranteed. But the moment they go too far and something in you finally shuts down, they begin to feel a shift they cannot ignore. They notice the change in your energy. They sense that the reactions they depended on are fading, and that is where fear begins to enter in a very real way. The arguments that once fed the cycle begin to disappear. The begging, the explaining, the trying to make things right, all of it starts to go quiet. In place of that, there is distance. There is emotional detachment. There is a silence that says you are no longer willing to keep playing the role they assigned to you. For a narcissist, that kind of silence can feel unbearable because supply is not only about being praised. It is also about keeping someone emotionally hooked, whether through conflict, confusion, guilt, or hope. When the person who once gave them constant engagement stops reacting, stops chasing, and stops feeding that need, they feel the emptiness immediately. What scares them is not only the absence of attention, it is the possibility that the person they believed would never leave may truly be gone in a way they cannot control. Another fear that rises in a powerful way is the fear that you finally see them clearly. Narcissists usually spend a great deal of energy creating an image they want others to believe. Depending on what benefits them most, they may present themselves as confident, charming, generous, misunderstood, intelligent, or even wounded and innocent. That image becomes their mask, and the person who gave them everything often helped hold that mask in place. You may have defended them, believed their version of events, or explained away behavior that should have concerned you. You may have seen their cruelty as stress, their manipulation as pain, and their selfishness as something temporary. Your trust helped keep their illusion alive. As long as you believed the story they were selling, they could keep feeling protected inside that false identity. But when they hurt you deeply enough, your perspective begins to change. Patterns you once overlooked become impossible to ignore. Contradictions start standing out. Their words no longer match their behavior, and the excuses that once sounded believable begin to fall apart. What once looked like charm now feels calculated. What once sounded like regret now feels rehearsed. That shift is deeply threatening to a narcissist because their sense of stability depends on people accepting the version of them they perform. When you stop believing in that performance, they feel exposed. You begin to question more, observe more, and react less. You stop defending them automatically. You stop accepting explanations that no longer hold up. And for them, standing in front of someone who now sees behind the image is one of the most uncomfortable experiences they can face. What makes it even more unsettling for them is that once someone truly sees through the mask, it is very hard to restore the same kind of blind trust again. They may try to pull you back with apologies, promises, blame, charm, or emotional pressure, but something has already changed. You are not looking at them the same way anymore. You are noticing what used to slip past you. You are hearing what is not being said. You are recognizing the pattern instead of getting lost in the moment. That awareness takes away a kind of power they once had over you. And a narcissist feels that loss more than they will ever admit, because when someone who once believed in them begins to see clearly, it threatens not just the relationship, but the whole structure of illusion they built to protect themselves from being known as they truly are. Another fear that cuts deeply after hurting someone who gave them everything is the fear of losing control over that person. Control is one of the forces that keeps a narcissistic dynamic alive. It does not always look dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it shows up through guilt, mixed signals, emotional withdrawal, confusion, love bombing, or making you feel responsible for their moods. Sometimes it is subtle enough that you do not even realize how much of yourself you have adjusted just to keep the peace. Over time, they grow used to influencing how you think, how you feel, and how you respond. That control becomes part of their comfort. So when you start pulling your energy back, setting limits, or emotionally detaching, it creates panic. It tells them they are no longer steering the dynamic the way they once could, and that loss of power can feel deeply destabilizing to them. When you no longer rush to fix things, when you stop explaining yourself over and over, when you become less emotionally available to manipulation, the narcissist feels their grip weakening. They may test you to see whether they can still get the same reaction. They may provoke, charm, guilt trip, or suddenly act vulnerable to draw you back into the old pattern. But what frightens them is not just your distance. It is your independence. It is the realization that you are beginning to exist outside the emotional system they created. You are no longer revolving around their approval, their moods, or their needs. That shift tells them they may not be able to pull you back into the same position again. And for someone who built the relationship around control rather than genuine intimacy, that can feel like the collapse of everything they thought they could keep in place. A narcissist often does not rely on obvious control alone. More often, it is emotional control, the kind that works quietly beneath the surface. They learn what pulls on your heart, what sparks your guilt, what makes you over-explain, and what keeps you emotionally tied to them even when you are exhausted. When someone gives them everything, they pay close attention to that person's emotional habits. They learn how to draw you back when you begin to pull away and how to keep you circling around the relationship. Over time, this predictability becomes something they depend on. They start believing they can wound you, ignore your pain, cross your boundaries, and still count on you to return, to fix what they broke, or to search for their approval again. That sense of power becomes deeply comforting because it convinces them the relationship is still operating on their terms. But after they hurt you deeply enough, the pattern begins to crack. The reactions they once counted on stop coming so easily. You may stop arguing. You may stop defending yourself. You may stop trying to make them understand what they did. Instead of chasing them for answers, you begin pulling your energy inward. You say less. You reveal less. You create emotional distance where there once was urgency. For the narcissist, this shift is deeply unsettling because the familiar script stops working. The emotional buttons they used to press no longer create the same effect. Suddenly, they cannot predict you with the same confidence. And when they lose that ability, they also lose the sense that they are guiding the direction of the relationship. That loss of influence creates real anxiety because it tells them their power over the dynamic is weakening in ways they cannot easily reverse. When a narcissist realizes they are no longer controlling the emotional movement of someone who once revolved around them, it shakes something fundamental inside them. They are forced to confront the fact that their influence may not be as permanent as they believed. Another fear that starts growing quietly after they hurt someone who gave them everything is the fear that the truth about them could come to light. Narcissists usually invest enormous effort into managing how others see them. Their image matters deeply. They want to be viewed as admirable, successful, misunderstood, kind, or generous. Whatever identity helps them gain the most approval and control in the moment. The person who stood by them through everything often played an unspoken role in protecting that image. You may have kept their secrets, softened their behavior when talking to others, or stayed silent about what really happened just to keep peace. In many cases, they grow comfortable believing you will always keep protecting their reputation, no matter what they do behind closed doors. But once they hurt you badly enough, that confidence becomes less stable. The same person who once shielded them now holds knowledge that could challenge the carefully maintained image they present to the world. You know the difference between their public face and their private behavior. You have seen the contradictions, the manipulation, the dishonesty, the coldness, and the emotional games that others may never have witnessed. That alone can create a quiet but intense fear inside them. They begin to wonder whether you might speak honestly about your experience. They worry you could tell friends, family, or others who still believe the polished version of their story. Even if you never intend to expose them, the fact that you could becomes enough to make them uneasy. For someone whose identity depends heavily on outside validation, admiration, and control over the narrative, the idea of losing that narrative feels deeply threatening. What disturbs them most is often not the pain they caused, but the possibility that the truth about how they treated you might interrupt the image they worked so hard to protect. Another fear that begins to surface after hurting someone who gave them everything is the fear of being replaced. At first, that may sound strange because narcissists often act as if people are easy to swap out. They may talk as though they always have other options waiting and that anyone who leaves can be replaced without difficulty. But beneath that confident surface, the reality is far more fragile. The person who gave them everything was never just another person in the crowd. That person usually offered a level of loyalty, patience, emotional labor, and devotion that is actually rare. You may have tolerated behavior that many others would have walked away from much sooner. You may have stayed through confusion, defended them when others questioned them, supported them during their worst moments, and continued giving care even when you were receiving very little in return. Over time, they become used to that kind of devotion, even if they never openly appreciate it. Then, when they finally push too far and risk losing you, another fear begins to rise. What if you move on and give that same loyalty, patience, and care to someone else? What if another person receives the understanding, support, and emotional presence that once centered around them? That possibility can feel deeply threatening because narcissists often experience people as extensions of their own importance. The idea that someone who once prioritized them could build a healthier and happier bond elsewhere challenges the belief that they were the center of your emotional world. It also forces them to face something they do not like admitting. On some level, they know how rare it is to find someone willing to tolerate their behavior for as long as you did. Real patience is not easy to replace. Genuine loyalty is not something they can simply demand from anyone. So the thought that you could walk away, heal, rebuild yourself, and eventually invest your love in someone who treats you with more care becomes a quiet but powerful source of fear. It is not necessarily because they have suddenly learned how to value the relationship in a healthy way. It is because your healing threatens their sense of exclusivity. It tells them they may no longer hold the special emotional position they once assumed was theirs forever. And for someone who built their security around being central in your world, that realization can feel deeply destabilizing. Another fear that can deeply shake a narcissist after they hurt someone who gave them everything is the fear of your silence and emotional detachment. For a long time, they become used to your reactions. Whether you responded with love, pain, frustration, tears, questions, or repeated attempts to save the relationship, your emotions kept the connection alive. Even conflict serves a purpose for them because conflict still gives them attention, engagement, and a way to measure their effect on you. When someone gives a narcissist everything, that person often fights hard to hold the relationship together. You try to explain yourself, seek clarity, and repair what keeps getting damaged. From the narcissist's point of view, that effort can start to feel like proof that no matter what they do, you will remain emotionally invested and keep returning to the same cycle with them. But when the damage finally becomes too deep, something changes in a way they often do not expect. Instead of arguing, pleading, or trying to make them understand, you begin to grow quiet. Your responses become shorter. The emotional charge begins to fade. The need for their attention, reassurance, or approval starts to weaken. That shift can feel extremely unsettling to a narcissist because your silence takes away the emotional feedback they once relied on. They can no longer track their importance through your reactions. The arguments they use to pull you back into the cycle stop happening. The emotional energy they fed on begins to disappear, and what makes that silence so powerful is that it often signals something much deeper than temporary distance. It suggests that the person who once fought for the relationship may no longer be attached in the same way. That calm detachment can feel far more threatening to them than anger ever did. Anger still shows emotional involvement. Silence often means that involvement is fading. It tells them their ability to stir your feelings is no longer as strong as it once was. For someone who depended on emotional influence and validation, this kind of quiet distance can feel like the stage has vanished beneath them. There is no longer a place for them to perform, provoke, or regain their position through drama. Instead, they are left facing the possibility that their role in your emotional world is shrinking. Another fear that can begin to surface after a narcissist hurts someone who gave them everything is the fear of being left alone with their own inner emptiness. This is something narcissists spend much of their lives trying to outrun, even if they never say it out loud. On the outside, they may appear confident, superior, charming, or completely sure of themselves. But much of that confidence is built on what comes from outside of them. They rely heavily on admiration, attention, and emotional reactions from others to support the image they have created. The person who gave them everything often played a major role in keeping that system alive. Your loyalty, your support, and your emotional investment kept reflecting back to them that they mattered, that they had value, and that they held significance in someone's life. Even when they acted in damaging ways, the fact that you stayed often reinforced the idea that they were still worthy of your attention and priority. That ongoing validation became part of what held their fragile self-image together, even if they never truly appreciated where it was coming from. But once they hurt you deeply enough and begin to sense that they may actually lose you, something uncomfortable starts rising to the surface. Without that steady stream of validation and emotional engagement, they are left with fewer distractions from their inner reality. The silence, absence, or distance of the person who once gave them constant emotional energy can begin to expose a part of themselves they work hard to avoid. That space is often filled with emptiness, insecurity, instability, or a lack of any solid inner identity. Because they depend so much on outside sources to reflect worth back to them, losing someone who consistently provided that reflection can feel deeply destabilizing. It takes away one of the emotional mirrors they use to maintain a more flattering image of themselves, and that absence can create discomfort they do not know how to sit with. They may not consciously understand what is happening. In many cases, it does not show up as insight. Instead, it appears as agitation, restlessness, irritability, sudden attempts to get your attention again, or a fast search for new people who can provide the same validation. But underneath those reactions is a deeper fear. It is the fear that without people constantly feeding them admiration, focus, or emotional energy, they may be forced to confront just how fragile the identity they project really is. And that is a truth they spend enormous energy trying to avoid. The final fear that often emerges after a narcissist hurts someone who gave them everything is the fear that you will truly heal and move on. At first, many narcissists do not take this possibility seriously. They assume the emotional bond, the attachment pattern, and the manipulation woven into the relationship will keep you connected to them in some way. They often expect that even if you leave, you will still think about them constantly, miss them, stay emotionally tied to the story, or eventually return. That belief gives them a certain kind of comfort. It allows them to imagine that their influence remains active long after the relationship has changed. In their mind, you may still belong to the emotional world they created, even if you are no longer physically present in it. But real healing threatens that belief in a major way. If you begin to rebuild your life, reconnect with yourself, find peace, and stop centering them in your thoughts, it means their hold is weakening for real. It means the version of you that once revolved around them is disappearing. And for a narcissist, the idea that you could become whole again without needing them, fearing them, or longing for them can be one of the most unsettling realities of all. They often assume that the emotional door will never fully close. Even after damaging the relationship, they believe some part of you will always stay connected to them. In their mind, they still hold a permanent place in your thoughts, your emotions, and your memories. They expect to remain someone you cannot completely detach from. But as time goes on and real change begins to show, a deeper fear starts rising inside them. They notice that you are no longer reaching out. Your life begins moving in a new direction. You start rebuilding yourself, reconnecting with people who genuinely support you, and putting your energy into parts of life that no longer revolve around them. The emotional pull they once had begins to weaken. And for a narcissist, that shift can feel deeply unsettling because your attachment once served as proof of their importance. Watching someone who once centered their emotional world around them grow stronger and more independent challenges something they relied on more than they may ever admit. What frightens them most is not simply the end of the relationship itself. It is the realization that their impact on your life may not last forever. The idea that you could fully understand what happened, learn from it, and become stronger because of it threatens the sense of control and significance they once drew from your pain, your loyalty, and your attention. When someone who once gave them everything finally heals and stops looking back, the narcissist is left confronting a truth they tried to avoid all along. Their hold over you was never as permanent as they believed, and that realization can shake them far more deeply than the relationship ending ever could on its own. In the end, when a narcissist hurts someone who gave them everything, the fear that follows is usually not rooted in genuine guilt or healthy remorse. More often, it is rooted in loss of control, loss of validation, loss of emotional supply, loss of the carefully protected image they built around themselves. The person who gave them endless patience, loyalty, and emotional energy was never just a partner, supporter, or companion in their eyes. That person became a steady source of reassurance, attention, admiration, and emotional engagement that helped hold their fragile sense of importance together. So when that person begins seeing clearly, starts pulling away emotionally, or leaves the cycle behind completely, it does more than create distance. It shakes the foundation the narcissist had quietly depended on for far longer than they would ever want to admit. The silence, the detachment, and the possibility that you may truly move forward without them all challenge the illusion they created about their power in your life. For someone who depends heavily on outside validation, recognizing that their influence is fading can feel deeply threatening. But the most important part of this story is not what the narcissist fears. It is what you begin to discover about yourself. You start seeing your own strength more clearly. You begin to understand the value of the love, patience, and energy you once gave so freely. And when you stop feeding the cycle and start reclaiming your emotional independence, the entire dynamic begins to change in a way they can no longer easily control. That is the real turning point, because the moment you fully recognize your worth and refuse to return to the same pattern, the power they once seemed to hold over you begins to disappear. What once looked like their victory quietly becomes the beginning of your freedom. This subject hits deeply because it helps people see the situation with more clarity and less emotional confusion. A lot of people remain stuck after a painful relationship because they keep searching for signs that the narcissist finally understands the damage they caused, feels true regret, or realizes what they lost. That kind of thinking can keep you emotionally tied to the story for much longer than you need to be. The deeper truth is often less about love and more about power, validation, and control. When you begin to step back, the real shift is not always inside them, it is inside you. Your withdrawal starts revealing how much of the connection was built on your emotional energy, your patience, and your willingness to keep trying. It also helps explain why your silence can have such a strong effect. Many people assume that if they stop reacting, nothing changes. In reality, calm distance often changes everything. When you stop arguing, stop over-explaining, and stop chasing closure, you interrupt the pattern that kept the cycle alive. The narcissist no longer gets the same emotional access, and that loss can feel threatening to them because it weakens the role they once played in your inner world. At the same time, you begin reclaiming your own mind. You start seeing that your love was never proof of their worth. It was proof of your capacity to care. And once you understand that, healing becomes less about being chosen by them and more about choosing yourself.